Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 141 of Two Amazon Sellers and a Microphone, brought to you by Solozo. Today, this is a topic. Hopefully, no one out there is dealing with this topic right now.
I'm already nervous.
I'm nervous, but it happens all the time. You wake up one morning and you got an email from Amazon and your account's been suspended, or an ASIN's been delisted, or just all the things that can make you just have sleepless nights. Well, joining us today to talk about how they help sellers recover from these situations, Chris McCabe from e-commerce. Chris, how are you doing, Chris?
Excellent. How are you? I'm
good. Not suspended, so really good.
Not suspended.
You're more than excellent.
Yes.
Knock on wood.
Yes, more than excellent. And I think this is a great topic. We have not had this topic on in a long time on our show, and I think it's going to be great because having a plan for when this happens. I'm so lucky. I've had ASINs suspended for different reasons, but I've never had my account suspended. But it does make you sort of lose sleep thinking about that possibility, especially if this is your full-time business and you're relying on it. It can be tricky. So I think this would be great for everybody just to hear how you can help people prepare and resolve these situations. We're excited to learn all about it, but before we even jump into all that, for anybody who doesn't know you, doesn't know about e-commerce, Chris, tell us about yourself. How did you get into helping people get unsuspended? It's a unique niche in this business. We'd love to hear your story, how you got into that, and then what you're doing right now with your business to help people out.
Yeah, I mean, it's been almost 7 years. I guess when I first left Amazon, I had this idea in mind already. Took kind of a year off, did some traveling, but soon after getting back to the US, had the idea that consulting was necessary because I saw how my former teams, which is I worked at Amazon for 5.5, 6 years on the seller side, so-called seller performance. We called it merchant risk. Same idea, right? Keeping the marketplace safe for buyers, punishing sellers as needed, sending warnings, deleting listings, and occasionally the account suspensions, but also reading appeals and accepting them for reinstatement. So that's what I did for several years at Amazon. I saw the need for a consultancy like mine. Back in those days, there were very few people that were even talking about this, let alone doing it. Sellers were kind of left to their own devices or calling support and just emailing seller performance, some desperate pleas for more information. But I saw the way things were trending downward and was happy to be leaving that team behind and happy to be starting my own self-employment and my own experience as a business owner. I mean, I'm a small business owner too, just like a lot of sellers. And I've experienced, Amazon the hard way, just like a lot of other people have since leaving that job. So, yeah. Interesting.
Well, it's cool that you have the perspective, obviously, of working at Amazon. I'd love to dig in a little bit about that experience. So you were, what years were you working at Amazon? When did you leave?
It's been several since I left. So I was there in the, I guess, mid 2000s is when I started. I began in the A to Z guarantee claim team, kind of reading the buyer side of the story, reading the seller side, and deciding claims, kind of like the judge of a claim. Right. I gravitated quickly from that into the seller performance team, where you're kind of, regulating who can sell, who can't sell. In those days, which I guess that you're talking mid 2000s, 2006. In those days, they were trying to keep everybody happy, sellers happy, buyers happy. Sometimes Amazon was, even paying the cost of a claim just to keep both sides happy if it was low enough cost. But they wanted sellers to engage and list more and sell more. And they wanted to encourage more sellers to stop selling as much on their own websites or on eBay or anywhere else, really, even in their own retail stores, and to sell more on Amazon. So it was when I started at Amazon, it was a more welcoming environment. Buyers, of course, were always taken care of well. Sellers are taken care of well in the beginning. I think it's just a kind of an ugly progression over time. The trend has been towards poor treatment of sellers, disregard for sellers, really terrible communication and badly worded communication, which some of that existed when I was there. We kind of resisted it. They water down the language a lot, sometimes for legal reasons, sometimes it's deliberately ambiguous, but nothing like what you see today, where it's almost 100% ambiguous. So,
And recently, the big thing was a bunch of Chinese sellers got just taken down for review manipulation. That was a big deal. It was a big in headlines just because of the sheer volume those brands were doing. What happened there? Like, what was going on there?
So, and you read about the data breach, probably. There was a hack or a data breach that revealed a lot of messaging and communication between those seller accounts or business owners and black hat groups that were harvesting data from inside Amazon. They were getting buyer info, and also they were communicating with buyers off the Amazon system, of course, to try to induce positive reviews in exchange for, financial compensation, which of course is against the rules. It's also against the law to fake reviews and to commit fraud, right? This is why the FTC gets involved in reviews abuse. It also breaks the law in terms of committing fraud. So Chinese companies don't necessarily care about breaking US law so much, even if they're selling on .com, but Amazon got to the point where they couldn't ignore it anymore. And they took a bunch of those companies, suspended a lot of those accounts to make a point, that wasn't going to continue. So
that's crazy. That was a big deal.
It was a big deal for me. One of those was one of my main competitors,
right?
One of my products, and that almost took me down because like in 2018, 2017, 18, these guys came on as a competitor of mine, and within 2 weeks they had like 10, 15,000 reviews.
Oh yeah,
it was insane.
Yeah,
I mean, and they were undercutting my price by a ton. I mean, I was like my sales almost went to a quarter of what they were overnight because of these guys, and but then it's like it's like 4 years later they're getting suspended finally, which is great. But talk about that middle ground, like we were talking about Amazon being very welcoming towards sellers. I mean, they were. I mean, Chris and I started. We started in 2014, which is obviously longer than or after probably when you left, maybe. But even
by then, but they were even back then. It wasn't as bad as it is now.
Yeah. They were good, but that did make it easier to do black hat stuff. I mean, they were opening the door to anybody. So I mean, people were coming in, but then I think the issue, and you can touch on this now, is Amazon's probably trying to do some of the right things, like getting rid of those sellers is probably right. Okay. But a lot of times it's just like they just put this policy in place and there's like collateral damage everywhere. And I've had that with certain ASINs I've had where I'm like, why is mine being suspended? I mean, I'm not a part of what they're doing.
You don't need pesticides.
It's totally inconsistent. I mean, if the right processes are in place, matched with or married to the right online tools, and the right people are in the right room with the right engineers, you can have a much better outcome. They haven't had that, and the proof is on the outside, right? Lots of false positives. You can measure the strength of a system based on how many false positives are enforced, because Amazon's costing itself money when they've got badly written algorithms or poor scripts that are taking listings down for false positives that shouldn't be down. And they're costing the sellers, of course, when they're taking their listings down. Yeah. So unfortunately, their sort of internal due diligence to make sure that doesn't happen seems to be very spotty. Managing people versus managing a process, or managing engineers who are creating tools. I don't know if there's a lot of synergy there. I don't know if there's a lot of accurate coordination or effective coordination there. And when you're not like a monopoly like they are, you don't have to move that fast. You kind of move at your own pace, move at your own convenience. You move at what works for you, not so much what works for sellers, especially when you don't feel like sellers have anywhere else to go. And if they leave the platform, you think they'll come back soon anyway, or you think that they're easily replaced. And Amazon's getting to the point with a lot of resellers, they think they're easily replaced to begin with. They'll get to the point where they've got their own competitive brands in most categories, and they'll probably start feeling that a lot of private label sellers are replaceable too. Hopefully 5, 6, 7 years down the road. But for brands, I think they've got a little bit more space and a little bit more breathing room. Yeah.
And there's two, correct me if I'm wrong, there's two different types of, there might be more. There's of suspensions. Like Dustin and I were talking earlier, we've had ASIN suspended.
Yep.
And we just quickly had to get those reactivated, submit a plan of action or whatever it was that they needed. Boom, you're back up, but your account's still active. Then there's like an account suspension. Yep. And luckily we've never had that. What's going on there? What's the difference between those?
I mean, we work with some large brands. If they lose a top selling ASIN, it's equivalent to an account suspension because they're losing tens of thousands of dollars a day, or in some cases an hour.
Good point.
They could be losing six figures within a couple of days just having their ASIN down. So it depends on what's going on and the volumes involved. It could be very damaging for a bigger brand. But on the account suspension side, the bigger problem, like I said, is Amazon's messaging has gotten increasingly vague, increasingly poor. You don't know why you've been denied. If you appeal it and they say it's accepted, obviously they send you reinstatement messaging, fairly straightforward. At that point, you should get your listings back and any money they owe you should be dispersed in the next cycle. If they send you a rejection, there's about 6 different ways that they tell you no. None of them have any relevant, valuable, and usable information. It either says you haven't sent us enough information, and then they copy and paste whatever they sent you before that, or it says that you haven't given us enough details, and there's no info on what details were weak, missing, requiring more description. You have to call account health services and talk to their reps to even get an inkling about why it might be denied. But I would say a good 40-50% of the time, the account health reps can't even track down the reason. So if somebody with access, to some back end account annotations can't figure out why you've been denied, then how are you supposed to figure that out? Amazon hasn't reconciled, which is kind of inane and idiotic, right? I mean, on a very logical basis. If Amazon hasn't reconciled those basic inefficiencies and inabilities for their own internal teams to communicate with each other, it's kind of hard to expect sellers to figure it out. So
that's so incredibly frustrating to deal with that. And do you see that getting better for them? Like, what if Walmart? What's that?
I see it getting worse. I mean, unless Andy Jassy, as the new CEO, has some cards up his sleeves that he hasn't played yet, he's only 2 months in. Unless he's been, kind of prepping for this for 5-6 months behind the scenes. But the messaging is getting worse. The response times out of Amazon are getting worse. And the problem is a lot of sellers are waiting for responses that are never coming. So they've already been declined or denied on appeal, but nobody tells them. Nobody sends a message. Sloppiness, disorganization. There's a lot of reasons for it. The problem is on the Amazon side, there are no viable professional level answers for that behavior. So I've seen it getting worse. I mean, not just this year in particular, but the last few years. There doesn't seem to be any management level auditing of the quality of seller performance investigations, appeal reviews, annotations on accounts seem very sparse when things are rejected. It just doesn't seem like there's enough quality oversight on the inside.
So what are the main reasons you see accounts getting suspended right now? I know you don't know, you have to dig in, but
right.
What are those reasons?
There's always a handful. There's kind of a cycle of trends. Anyone who's manipulating sales rank or product review abuse, that's a hot topic, has been for a while. That's always in there. People getting suspended for one reason or another, performance or policy related, and then trying to open a new account to evade or circumvent the first suspension. There's a lot of related account suspensions. Sometimes people don't even know which account they're considered related to, and they have to spend time researching that. Performance, late shipment rate. A lot of people are being bounced out of seller fulfilled prime because they're not meeting those targets. We're heading into Q4, and anybody who's marking shipments as marking items as shipped and they haven't shipped yet, that's an extremely poor decision. They're probably going to get either suspended or even signed out of their account. So late shipments, bad fulfilled by merchant. Some people have to come back 100% FBA on appeal. So there's performance reasons, and the rest of it's really just listing violations, policy violations, people not following listing compliance rules simply because, like you said, they see other sellers doing it and getting away with it. And they're like, why can't I? And they don't understand that enforcement's very inconsistent. That's another thing I don't really see getting better anytime soon. Like the consistency of why you get punished, but your neighbor doing the same thing doesn't get punished seems easy, seems logical. They haven't gotten anywhere near close enough to figuring that part out. So you have to assume that somebody might get away with murder, but you might pay the price for doing the same thing. So, yeah.
I see that all the time.
I mean, everybody sees that. So
It's
we don't even need to explain it too much because
it's incredibly frustrating. So now let's talk about having some sort of plan of action, like for how this happens and at what point do sellers need to start communicating with you? Like before there's ever a problem, or when something hits, they need to reach out immediately, or how does that work?
I mean, the plan, the POA, the plan of action that they ask you for an ASIN, if you've got one or more ASINs that are the plans are being rejected, consider that your risk score, your account health is going to become at risk, the yellow part of the bar that they give you. So once you're in that zone, you could hear from account health anytime saying that you've got 72 hours to produce a plan of action for the whole account because there have been too many issues or there's too many problems that you haven't resolved. So you don't want to get to that point. I mean, obviously you get to the 72-hour point, time is of the essence and the clock's ticking. I mean, at that point, I would say you have to call me. You might be able to produce a plan of action yourself and then wait and see if it's accepted. And then if it's rejected, you'd pretty much have the whole account suspended. And then you could talk to me, but it's also like you're already losing sales at that point. So ideally, you take care of things as they come in. And when there are ASIN level actions, either warnings for policy violations or buyer complaints for condition or quality or authenticity, you're getting those reinstated with a POA at the ASIN level so that you never have an account level action. The best way to avoid an account level suspension, whether it's Q4 or anytime, is to handle these ASIN level actions as they come in.
So that's how it works. If you get an ASIN level and you don't take care of it, it moves on to the entire account.
Eventually. I mean, sometimes they don't ask for a plan of action. They ask for invoices or supplier info, but as a lot of sellers have found out, they're rejecting that info like crazy. They love to say your supplier is not verifiable. They don't like their website. They don't see the SKUs that you're selling on the supplier's website. Sometimes that alone is a reason for them to reject it. Obviously, if your supplier doesn't have a website, you shouldn't be buying from them, period. Because they can just reject you based on that. Lots of appeals are declined when they can't find info on the supplier by searching or when they can't find their website. And then the rest of it's invoices.
Is more of this like wholesale retail arbitrage suspensions, or is private label?
I mean, there are some private label sellers that have really bad invoices and no info on where the products are made or where they come from. And sometimes they reject them as well. But yeah, for the most part, you're right. It's resellers. It's arbitrage, using liquidators. Online arbitrage, retail arbitrage. Sometimes just the middleman supplier you're using, there's just not enough good verifiable info about them in a search online. So or they've got really bad looking websites. It looks like kind of a glorified online clearinghouse type website, and Amazon doesn't want to see people sourcing from places like that. They understand that you get cheap product there and you get a good margin on it. It's not like it's a mystery why people use those sites. Amazon just knows that there's a high likelihood of a lower quality item being sourced if it's changed hands a million times. More likely to get condition complaints and authenticity complaints. So
in my account health, I like this area. I freak out if everything's not zero. Like if I have just one thing that has a number one, I freak out at that. But I've seen like other accounts, and they're like 20s and there's a ton of numbers. I'm like, man, maybe I shouldn't be freaking out this much. But it makes me nervous when I go to that area and everything's not zero. Is there an area where I really need to make sure that if something happens there, I need to make sure to take care of that?
I mean, if everything's zero, you don't really have anything to worry about. So it depends on how much comfort you need, because selling on Amazon is kind of dangerous no matter what, right? Things could come out of the blue. It could even be like a competitor attacking you, and it's not even a real problem with your products or a problem with your performance metrics, right? It could just be somebody takes too much interest in you because you're successful and you're doing too well, which gets into the whole, black hat brand abuse conversation. But, there are people with a lot of crooked numbers on their account health dashboard that aren't necessarily in the at-risk with a high risk score. Risk score being inside Amazon. Like when I was working there, I'd look at your risk score. You would see it as account health. Your status being green, yellow, or of course, if you're red, you're suspended. But as long as you're dealing with issues, I mean, I still hear from people who are kind of appealing things on their own and guessing and not really knowing what they're doing. And they get rejected a bunch of times. And then they either forget about it or they delete the listing or they just kind of wish it away. I mean, those you can see right on your account health that those are still impacting you negatively. It's not like 2 or 3 years ago where it was so vague and you had to hire somebody like me just to go into your account and give you a kind of a health check, right? Now it's kind of more obvious. And if your appeals are getting rejected, maybe you shouldn't be appealing it yourself, or maybe you should figure out why they're getting rejected. Again, calling into account health is kind of a mixed bag. Maybe they can tell you, maybe they can't. And a quick side note on talking to account health reps, do not listen to their conjecture, casual observations. In my opinion, this is not the opinion editorial page of the newspaper. Get factual information. What does it say in my account? Why did performance deny it? What's missing? Is it the POA plan of action? Is it the documentation? Don't let them guess, because they could completely give you the wrong info and you could revise your appeal and submit something else, which is even worse than the first appeal because it's way off track based on what an account health rep says. So take it with a grain of salt. Make sure you can even maybe call back a couple of times and try to see if you hear the same thing 2-3 times in a row for confirmation. But aside from that, you're leaving your account health. If you're not resolving these and you don't know how to escalate things to management level or above when things are just ignored, you're leaving them to rot. And unfortunately, that does make it more likely that your account will be manually reviewed in the near future.
Yeah. Do accounts ever get suspended? Just like you were in the green and then the next day you're suspended for some reason and there's no explanation? Or does it usually go where, okay, here's your issues and you haven't resolved them, now you're suspended?
I mean, if you suddenly get a bunch of counterfeit complaints, expect anything to happen. If you start behaving badly and attacking competitors, expect to lose your account at any moment if you're caught. I mean, if you start faking reviews by, doing 100% off giveaways or just completely abusing the review system to induce positives and discourage negative reviews instead of having a more, objective system where buyers can kind of make up their own minds, that's a code of conduct violation. You could lose your account no matter how good your account health is. So, I mean, I think sellers are finally getting to the point where they understand some of that. Another one is like fake rights ownership complaints. You see somebody jump on your listing and you start saying, hey, these guys are hijacking my listing. I'm going to accuse them of counterfeit and swat them away. A lot of people don't understand these concepts. They don't understand that if they start filing fake counterfeit complaints or claims in brand registry, they could be punished themselves. They could lose their account. Some people are getting their brand registry revoked from bad behavior. And some of them come to us to repair it. And I started asking questions and I realized they really didn't know what they were doing. They were given bad coaching from, some shady attorney somewhere that wanted to squeeze them for a few $1,000s, or they just did it on their own. They were just like, I got to swat these people away. They're annoying me. I know they don't have my product, but I don't feel like controlling my own distribution channels. I'm just going to start using Amazon as a little, like kind of a mercenary for me or a proxy, and knock off my competition. That's a terrible idea. I don't know why people are still doing that, but we still hear about people who get their accounts suspended over things like that. So,
so many
things. Like, it makes me scared.
I mean, this isn't like everyone's typical everyday experience, but some people experience this stuff out of the blue. And also we're heading into like September, October. I mean, this is the peak time of year. Yeah. So it's good to think about this stuff once a year, at least, when it could happen to you. Even thinking about if you're rising in sales rank and your competitors taking more of an interest in you, being ready to report abuse, like attacks against you and attacks against your brand, not blindly with no idea and no evidence. I'm not saying just start firing in all directions every time something goes wrong. I mean, buyers legitimately complain about products that they aren't happy with too, but mentally being prepared and understanding that there's a lot of nasty behavior on Amazon. There's nothing wrong with having a strategy for it in case it hits you and being prepared for that eventuality. So
I got hit. It was probably a year and a half or 2 years ago. I got an email from Amazon saying that I was, I guess, being accused by another seller of patent infringement on my product. Okay. And it was a new product that I was just launching. And so I was aggressively advertising it. I was moving up the rankings, lower price, etc. So I was very much on the radar.
Yep.
And I don't know if I was actually infringing on patent. Didn't seem like it at all. It seemed like I wasn't doing it. And I wasn't going to take the time to hire an attorney to find it. I was too early in this product launch process.
Right.
I was like, forget it. But Amazon in their correspondence was like, you need to resolve this with the other seller.
Right. Yeah.
It was like they were just getting out. So that other guy could just keep hammering Amazon that I was in infringement, I guess. And eventually that would have caused me an issue.
I'm dealing with that. Patent and design infringements, allegations of, let's say, whether they're valid or not, are very common right now. I'm dealing with a lot of those right now this week.
You mentioned that if let's say I was doing that to somebody else, let's say somebody's encroaching. I mean, I'm just sending Amazon, hey, this guy's encroaching on or this is an infringement on my patent.
Right.
Eventually if I'm wrong, I'm going to be in trouble for constantly doing that. So, right. Is that?
Oh, yeah. Well, because that's IP abuse and you're getting Amazon caught in the middle and they don't want to be there. They're a marketplace and they're a platform and they're not a court. So if you keep going to Amazon, if your rights are being infringed upon, of course, Amazon has a legal and a business obligation to help you protect yourself, or they have to honor and protect your rights when you can prove that your rights ownership's infringed upon. That's what the notice team infringement process is built upon. But they're not there to officiate all these disputes. So they don't want people filing baseless, unsubstantiated claims where there is no likely or there is no intellectual property infringement present. I mean, that's just a waste of their time.
Sure.
Because they have to take down, in your case, they took down your listing, made you work it out with this other person. Their preference, is for you to go to court with that other party and to leave them out of it. But in reality, that rarely happens. It happens sometimes. But the reality is you're probably contesting it as a non-infringement of that patent. I mean, it's hard to say. I would say get a patent assessment done by, a competent IP attorney who can tell you whether or not you're infringing to begin with. If you're not sure, and you need to get that legal knowledge, in there and make that assessment before you bring Amazon into it. So
there's I don't know if it's a myth or if it's truth to it or what, but there's things going around where, like, if you get a letter or an email from Amazon, first thing you want to do is, even though you may not be your fault, admit the fault, because you're going to get a quicker resolved and to get the listing active or to get your account back on. Is that still the case? Like, even though you may not do something? People,
that's kind of Popper's advice. That's color form and copy and paste advice by non-experts. I don't advise people to admit fault no matter what the situation is.
Okay, good to know. Because that's everybody's like, first thing you got to do is admit the fault, even though you may not do it. Admit it, because then that'll give you quicker results.
No, I mean, if you admit fault, like, yes, I sold counterfeit, and you didn't, then you've committed to that.
Yeah. You're in.
Why would you admit to counterfeit sales when you haven't sold counterfeit?
Good point.
Yeah. It is a good point. Yeah. I mean, it's so unnerving when you get that email. You're like, oh no, what's going on? I mean, that patent one, long time ago, I had a trademark one too, but that was a whole different story. But so those are the reasons why I've had issues with ASINs, but fortunately it never went to the account level. So let's say tomorrow I wake up, I got bad news. What's my plan of action? I immediately contact you and we start to go to that.
I mean, people can always send me like a copy of the suspension notification. The contact form on e-commerce, Chris, normally that's our first answer, is send us a copy of the suspension notification. A lot of people just do it now. Like, that's what they put in there. And I can see what Amazon's messaging was. And then I can start asking questions. Do you have an invoice for this product? Did you have buyer complaints for it? If it's IP related, sometimes there's a question of like, are you working with an IP attorney and so forth? I'm not an attorney. If there are no legal issues present, you don't obviously need to work with an IP attorney, but I try to help them figure out where this came from. Are there complaints, voice of the customer, buyer complaints in messages that they received, things like that. Yeah.
Just like out of curiosity, what's like the most egregious reason you've seen Amazon shut somebody's account down? Just like it made no sense that they shut it down, but they did.
Oh, I thought you meant egregious, like the worst things that sellers do.
No. Like,
But
no,
we'll go there next.
We'll go there next. But the first one is like, on Amazon's side, it was egregious that Amazon shut the account down because it made no sense.
Suspected IP infringement, where there's no actual infringement from a rights owner. It's just bots, like false positives, bots. Yeah.
So that was Amazon actually shutting the account down without actually having anybody else make a claim that there was infringement.
I've had some people. I've got one now. It's they're products that I don't want to maybe say what kind of product it is, but let's just say it uses words and names that are similar to like NFL teams. Like let's think of or baseball teams. So like Orioles, Cardinals, Bears, like the animal kingdom, whatever, that'll show up in like any, not just the NFL, any sports. So they've got the bot set up, right, to like, oh, we want to make sure anyone selling NFL has a licensing agreement, and they're trying to prevent their own need to enforce an IP claim. So they've created these like, false positive bots that are way out of control. And this is somebody who just sells things that involve those animals, like patterns, or you want to think of it like paintings, let's say, of bears and cardinals and Orioles and whatever. And that's like ridiculous that you can't just write back and be like, we're still working on that one, by the way. You can't just write back and say, this is obviously a false positive. Can you reinstate our account? Account health and the idiots at Amazon are telling them, oh, you need to take responsibility for this and explain why you attracted our, misbegotten bots, our out of control. That's seriously what they said when he called account health. That's how embarrassing it's getting.
That's
that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about, like that just overarching slap. It's like, oh, we got to watch out for anything that has a sports team's name in it, and then someone's selling a teddy bear and it's got the word bear in it, and they're in trouble. I bet during COVID,
I'm gonna actually stand up for a sec, so I hope this isn't going to get anyone seasick.
Go for it.
The wind just blew my door open, so
no, you're good. Because the next question I have is, what about during the pandemic? Did this just go off the rails a little bit with suspensions? Like I'm thinking of people that sold anything that had like mask in the name or something like that, where they always got triggered. Did you see a lot of stuff like that?
People were getting accused of price gouging, and it was like the bots were out of control on price levels changing and that sort of thing. But the pandemic I think it's just how they handle anything they want to fix easily and quickly. They grab a bunch of engineers, throw them in a room, and say, create an algorithm for this. And it's not necessarily fixed manually. They roll these things out half-baked. They correct them eventually, but a lot of listings go down. Sometimes sellers go down, and there isn't enough logic built into it. If the investigations themselves aren't performed properly, like by my former teams, I wasn't an engineer. I was like an account investigator. Then that's a poverty and a failure of management, and there's a lack of auditing of investigative quality. That's a bigger issue there, because they're letting these investigators suspend too many accounts that shouldn't have been suspended, and then not really fixing the root cause of the problem. They're just maybe cleaning up some of the mess and then moving on to the next thing without addressing, like, well, how did we get here in the first place? Which is interesting, because when they ask you for a plan of action, that's what they want you to do. They want you to address the root cause of the problem, to figure out how you got to violate a policy or poor performance, whatever it is, broke some rules. You're expected to do that full diagnostic. And if it's not 100% to their liking, right, they reject it or kick it back. And then on top of that, the rest of the plan of action is delineating, not just detailed solutions, but effective, credible, believable solutions so that they can justify reinstating you. So it's like, that disconnect where they got an awfully high standard for sellers up here. The standard for themselves is a little bit lower simply because they're the marketplace. They've got the power and they can afford to take longer to figure things out. Right. So
you can't just say your bot screwed up and took me down.
I mean, you should. No, if it's an error, they have at the bottom of most of their messaging, like if this is an error and you can prove it, whatever, you can appeal it as an error. But a lot of people do that. I mean, some sellers appeal it as an error where it's definitely not an error and they're kind of wasting their shot. But no, you should appeal it as an error if it's just like, hey, this is a false flag. We do that all the time. It's just that sometimes we don't do it through the appeal button, like having the seller appeal through Seller Central. We're encouraging them to get it to surface it on a manager level or even above. If the manager delegated it to their team and nothing happened with it, then you have to go to kind of the boss's boss and say, hey, look, this wasn't reviewed properly. You can tell, don't take my word for it. Look at it yourself. It's obviously a mistake, and we need to correct it because we're losing $10,000 a day. And in Q4, there's a lot of people who would be, a lot of seller victims losing $10,000 a day in like November, December from those types of mistakes. So,
yeah, it doesn't take that many. It doesn't take that many days of being suspended. You're really in big trouble as a business.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. That's why I always say, to get back to your earlier point, you don't necessarily have to show me something right away for the purposes of having me start working on it right away. I mean, for one thing, our priority rate is higher. It costs more to have us work on something right away versus tomorrow or the next day. Number one. Number two, I can always look at it and give you a quick opinion, and then you can go back and work on it yourself. So you don't necessarily have to pay us every time to hire us. I mean, sometimes we can just give you like a quick opinion, look at it. And, I mean, I'm happy to do that for your group, your audience, just as I do for anybody, because that's why we have the contact form. And that's why I'm as publicly outspoken on a lot of these issues as I am. It can be hard to know. The messaging's so murky, and Amazon often doesn't respond. They're just silent. You appeal, silence. You get a denial, you ask them why, silence. They're not giving you much to work with. So
that's so scary.
Okay, let's go to that one with the craziest thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. So this has been a hot topic this year, I guess, back into last year, the concept that there were black hat consultants just simply paying Amazon employees to reinstate accounts, paying bribes. I've had some people contact me that said, yeah, I paid an employee a bribe. And it's like, from the very outset, that's so alarming because maybe the employee reached out to them like, hey, I saw your account. I know you're suspended. How about I fix this for you? Wink, wink. That's alarming. I've heard that. I've heard consultants calling sellers saying, hey, you were suspended 10 minutes ago, weren't you? We can help you with that. Oh, really? I guess somebody tipped them off that somebody was about to get suspended in 10 minutes, right? That's the most egregious stuff that I hear. Anything that involves not just black hat. I mean, black hat and fraud goes back, millennia, right? not e-commerce fraud, but the types of things where people call me or email me and admit that they paid a bribe, that at least to a consultant that was supposed to go to maybe it didn't make it to the employee, but they're trying to get employees to fix the problem without appealing it or without going through kind of the get your hands dirty, do your homework, write a plan of action stuff, because they're losing too much money. They don't want to risk a denial. They don't know how to appeal. And somebody whispers in their ear that they can handle the problem much more effectively. So I've had some sellers tell me that they've been caught by the company. I mean, it's a good sign that Amazon's catching some of these guys, right?
Sure.
So there's some good news, bad news in there, but the bad news is that I get the phone call or the email to begin with. That's what alarms me. So.
I just feel dirty now. That's crazy.
That's not necessarily you as a legit white hat seller. It's not necessarily your problem in terms of it's not up to you to fix it. And you're a member of the community, but you don't work there. It only becomes your problem if you start getting attacked by a competitor who feels like he's got some internal sabotage angle he can play against you with the help of somebody who works there. Or, like I said, if somebody's trying to make a buck out of the whole suspension racket in terms of interacting with internal people that they shouldn't be interacting with, sharing a fee with them, whatever this court case is that's coming up, this federal investigation that resulted in the indictment last year, hinted at or pointed to people who were, sharing seller consulting fees with employees, which obviously is against the law. So.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. I mean, it's getting so big. There's so much money,
Yep.
That, I mean, and these large companies, I'm sure a lot of those companies that have been suspended, they had to be doing stuff like that. They were making, there was $1 billion of suspended just in that one deal.
Yeah.
I mean, that shouldn't be surprising, but it is surprising that's.
And I'll guarantee you that some of those large Chinese accounts, without naming names or singling one out, I guarantee you they had warnings for reviews abuse. They had slaps on the wrist that didn't mean anything to them. They thought they were too big. They were never going to lose those accounts. Maybe they even had reviews deleted, maybe like even thousands of reviews.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I have a service where I help people report reviews abused by their competitors. We reported a seller. I think Amazon deleted 2,400 reviews, and I'm pretty sure since we got that done, they built back another few thousand like that. I'm not actively working on it now, but I heard when I was at the Prosper show last month, I ran into the client who told me that they've rebuilt. So they're not taking it seriously unless they're kicked off for good. There's only one message that they understand, which is their business getting shut down forever. So
it's a scary thing.
It is. Man, there's so much.
Most sellers don't encounter this. It's not like a majority of the time you're going to get a call from an employee who says, let me help you out, wink, wink. I just need a little something in return. It's mostly people writing a plan of action, not getting a actionable response from Amazon, struggling to figure out what to do with it. And then it just kind of like mounts, right? You get another ASIN that has a problem. You haven't fixed the first one. Then you got two problems, and you don't want your problems to multiply because then it's overwhelming. It's frustrating, and it's too much to handle at one time. So.
Yeah. I mean, this is definitely an area where you'd want an expert to take care of this for you. You don't want to go down this road
once
yourself.
You get to that point, for sure.
Yeah.
What's the turnaround time? I know it varies, but what's the turnaround time to get something like an account suspension activated again?
I mean, most of them, it's either, if it's appealed and the first appeal is accepted, then that's probably a matter of days. Most of them are probably somewhere in the weeks, 1 to 2 week kind of range. Okay. On the outside, it'd be like, a month or something longer. But there's a variety of reasons why it could take that long. If it's Amazon not properly reviewing a plan of action, kicking it back, if it's Amazon taking a while to respond. When Amazon stops responding to appeals, which sometimes they just go on kind of de facto holiday and they're really just not answering anybody, the escalation paths and channels start clogging up because everyone's going to managers and VPs and people that they've, heard about or found on LinkedIn or heard about in the news. And they're emailing all these guys. Sometimes they're tweeting those guys. And they're like, I'm not hearing from any of your performance teams. I'm not getting a response to my plan of action. And then that's what really takes a while, is when those teams that are, you're talking about a manager or a VP who's only got 10 or 12 or 14 people that they're working with to delegate to. And those dozen people are way backed up too. Then it's a real delay that might last like a month. Yeah.
Oof.
Which could be a lot of, it's a lot of missed sales if you're talking about October, November.
Yeah. Well, what happens once you get reinstated if it's not your fault, let's say, or you figure out that you were, collateral damage, let's say, does all your products go back at the same organic rank they were before? Or was it like if you're out of stock and now you're having to try to compete again for everything?
Yeah. I mean, it depends on how long you're gone. Hopefully you're not knocked off that long. It shouldn't be that perceptible if you're only gone, for a short time. But there are some people some people contact us after being suspended for 2 months, and we haven't heard from them until the second or third month. And they've just been trying and trying and trying. Why people just insist on doing it themselves until they're desperate, I can't answer. I mean, sometimes they hire some crappy consultant, and that's the reason why. And I understand that. I mean, it's regrettable that they didn't do a little bit more homework before hiring the person. But anyway, those are the people that we hear from that they've really just struggled to regain their sales rank and their positioning. So it takes them a while to recover. Yeah.
Well, anyone listening right now knows where to go. That's for sure. So if anybody right now who's listening, if they're in this situation right now, tell them how they can contact you and what they need to do. I know you've got the form on your website, e-commerce Chris. Is that it? Fill the form out and that gets the
e-commerce Chris. Also, just wanted to give a quick rundown of the conference we're doing here in Boston on September 3rd. It's a one-day, all-day event here in Boston, which is where I'm based. Seller Velocity Conference, sellervelocityconference.com. I'll give you that link, of course, and I'll give you guys a discount code as soon as we're done here. But it's an all-day event, several speakers. It's a conference for brands who are trying to maintain what they've got, but also build upon it and just run an efficient, smart, lean business that cuts out any inefficiencies and continues to grow. Obviously, I handle your ASINs down. You don't want to lose too much revenue. Get that listing back up as quickly as possible. Piece of things, but there's lots of things going on as within the Amazon community, and there's a lot of agencies and consultants out there that don't do what I do. And I don't do what they do. They're specialized, and we wanted to make sure we got them here together. So Seller Velocities, September 23rd in Boston. Anyone has any questions on that? It's an in-person event. We would love to see you here in Boston. We understand some people aren't traveling right now. Perfectly understandable. There's a virtual option as well, which is considerably cheaper, but in person for sure we're going to be here. My website, e-commerce Chris. I've got a contact form there. Also, my email is Chris, CHRIS @ecommercechris.com. So,
awesome. And you can also, he has his own podcast. So,
my podcast, yeah. So, sorry, Seller Performance Solutions is the podcast.
Yeah. So, if you want to hear more about like suspensions and what's going on in the Amazon space regarding this, check it out.
Yeah, it's a good thing to stay on top of because it's a shifting landscape. Let's say, no doubt about it. Well, we will put all those links to the conference, the Seller Velocity Conference in Boston. Great city. Might have to come up there. Yeah, awesome. So that'll be in the links in the notes. Also, your website, e-commerce Chris, and the discount code. We'll have that in there as well. As soon as we wrap this up after the show, we'll make sure we attach that. Chris, thanks so much for joining us. We'll have to have you on in the future again just to see what's new, what new crazy reasons are people getting suspended, and what new crazy ways are people figuring out how to game the system.
Exactly. I mean, this was great. Let's do it again in sometime in holiday peak or Q4.
Perfect. Thanks so much. And thanks everybody else for tuning in. If you love content like this, make sure you subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you like to listen to podcasts on. We're on all of them. You can also check out our live streams every day. Pretty much we go live with an amazing person in the Amazon space like Chris. It's great content for everybody. So make sure you follow us on Solozo's Facebook page, LinkedIn, as well as Solozo's YouTube channel. Subscribe to those, turn on notifications and get notified when we go live so you can hear the guest and the topic of the day. Also, if you're currently selling on Amazon right now and you're struggling with your PPC and you'd like to have an automated solution or a fully managed solution with our team here at Solozo, we'd love to talk to you. You can go to solozo.com right now. You can book a demo. Chris or I'll walk you through the platform and how we can help you, or you can just get started right away with a 14-day free trial. So make sure you check that out as well. Thanks, Chris, for joining us. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Have a great one.